News Talk 610 AM and 102.1 FM. KBNU.
It is 4:03 at News Talk KBNU. I'm Bill Walter with this news update brought to you by U&I Furniture. Local veterans and public service groups are seeking volunteers to support a week-long patriotic event at Elk Ridge Park in North Logan. The highlights of that event are a 5-day display of the American Veterans Traveling Tribute from Wednesday to Sunday, and Cache Valley's own Michael J. Allred Ride for the Fallen on Saturday. At least 30 volunteers will be needed this morning, or as of this morning, to help set up the traveling display, according to Phil Redlinger, the executive director of the Cache Valley Veterans Association and the Dan Gillenskog Veterans Resource Center in North Logan. The American Veterans Traveling Tribute is an 80% scale replica of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. That replica measures 360 feet long and stands 8 feet high at its apex, with the names of more than 50,000 combat fatalities of the Vietnam War inscribed on it. Throughout the 5 days that follows, military organizations and community services will provide on-site resources for veterans, he adds, with the goal of strengthening community bonds. And that support will include booths from local nonprofits aiming to help raise awareness on PTSD, suicide, and grief supports. KBNU News Time is 4:04. KBNU weather for tonight. We do have a threat of showers and thunderstorms in our forecast for this evening, about a 30% chance, and then a couple of days where things clear out and warm up. Sunny mid-80s on Wednesday, partly cloudy, middle 80s on Thursday. Another slight chance of storms by Thursday night. Right now with some light rain, it's 64 at KBNU. KBNU weather brought to you by the Lawn Doctor. Lawn Doctor's 2-service oil enrichment program will help increase the size and number of roots in your grass. Call 753-LAWN.
U&I Furniture has always been here to give you great value for your money. When it comes to home furnishings, it really is always a better buy at U&I. And right now, U&I is closing out last year's model mattresses. Closeouts on new models and displays, too. Memory foam, innerspring, and hybrids from a number of different name brand manufacturers. And ask U&I to show you this popular copper-infused mattress that sleeps cooler. And did you know U&I has a good selection of sheets and mattress protectors, too? U&I Furniture, over 90 years in downtown Logan. There's always a better buy at U&I.
KBNU News Time is 4:06. The Salt Lake City Fire Department said they were involved in a unique situation late Sunday in which they had to rescue show horses trapped following a rollover accident. According to a social media post, the department extricated 5 horses from a hauler that had been involved in the accident at 1 a.m. on I-215. The horses were high-end Arabian show horses on their way to a show in Canada when the accident occurred. It took 16 firefighters about 2 hours to get the horses out of the overturned trailer. All the horses were looked at by a veterinarian and deemed to be in good condition. One of the 2 human passengers in the trailer was brought to the hospital to be checked out. The department thanked FedEx after the company's trucks were used to form a makeshift corral to help load the horses onto another trailer. No details about what caused the accident have been released. And the 2 Utah State prisons were placed on lockdown last night after a brawl broke out between 15 inmates at the Central Utah Correctional Facility. The Utah Department of Corrections said 5 people were taken to a local hospital to have their injuries assessed and treated. It was not clear how severe their injuries were. The Department of Corrections also said there were weapons involved in the fight. It appeared that it may have been gang-related. Both the Gunnison Prison and the Utah State Correctional Facility in Salt Lake City were placed on lockdown. The incident is under investigation. In a move to reshape the landscape of philanthropy, the Utah Nonprofits Association, UNA, is partnering with the Utah Film Center to present an exclusive screening of the thought-provoking documentary Uncharitable. This film promises to peel back the layers of traditional charitable giving, unveiling a radical approach to changing the world. The film will be screened on September 13th at the Salt Lake City Public Library, followed by a panel discussion with some of the film's producers. Uncharitable, led by Dan Pallotta, renowned for his trailblazing TED Talk on philanthropy, exposes the dark side of philanthropy and introduces a radical new way of giving. The documentary introduces a paradigm-shattering strategy encouraging charitable entities to break free from conventional constraints and embrace a new era of transformative change. The film underscores the pressing need to invest wholeheartedly in positive transformation and urges viewers to reimagine the potential of their contributions. KVNU News Time is 4:09. For more details on these and other stories, visit CashValleyDaily.com.
Information and news you need. News Talk KVNU 610 AM and 102.1 FM.
This message is for all you gentlemen in Cache Valley who enjoy singing, making music, and the camaraderie that only comes from a really great men's choir. We are looking to add new singers to Cache Valley Men's Chorus and will be starting rehearsals Tuesday, September the 5th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. We meet in the LDS Church at 1800 North, 400 East in North Logan. Please come join us for a rehearsal any Tuesday in September and then be prepared for a simple audition afterward. We are looking forward to seeing you soon.
New federal guidelines have nearly doubled the number of Americans eligible for lung cancer screening. Insurance companies are required to cover these tests for those ages 50 to 80 who currently smoke or used to smoke. Along with new treatments, lung cancer screening saves lives. If you are 50 to 80 years old and smoke or used to smoke, talk to your doctor about lung cancer screening. For more information and to find a screening center near you, visit the National Lung Cancer Roundtable at nlcrt.org.
You do amazing things every day, and we're not just talking about your pregnancy. You do it all. So why risk letting COVID-19 stop you? COVID-19 vaccines are especially important during pregnancy. Take control of your health so you can keep showing up for the ones you love. Get the COVID-19 vaccine to protect yourself and your pregnancy. It's safe, proven, effective. You could say it's pretty amazing, just like you. Message brought to you by the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Visit acoc.org/COVID vaccine to learn more.
If you're feeling dizzy or off balance, you're not alone. 35% of adults over 40 in the U.S. have a problem with their inner ear, and many conditions go undiagnosed and untreated. But there's hope. For more information, call 800-837-8428 or visit liferebalanced.org and discover a life rebalanced. That's 800-837-8428 or liferebalanced.org. Sponsored by the Vestibular Disorders Association.
For the people.
We are waiting with bated breath for news from the Cache Republican Party meeting an executive committee tonight.
With Jason Williams.
And I'm really excited about this next segment. We have two guests here in studio. We're going to talk about something that we've talked about many times here on the show, but from a bit of a different angle.
Weekday afternoons from 4 till 6 on News Talk KVNU, 610 AM and 102 FM.
Welcome to KVNU's For the People. It is Tuesday, August 22nd. I'm Jason Williams. Bill Walter here in the studio as well. And nice little rainy afternoon. Kind of enjoying a little flashback to spring. I refuse to call it fall. This is a flashback to spring. I don't care what anyone says. What are we at temperature-wise?
64.
Feels perfect.
In parts of the U.S., 80 million people in the U.S. are just sweltering right now. High temperatures and high humidity at the same time.
Humidity is... We had a bit of that here in Cache Valley the last couple of days, and we're not used to it, so it seems a lot worse than it is, and I tell myself that every time I want to complain. But Yeah, when you get those high temperatures and just a tiny little bit of rain here in the west, you get a taste of what it's like, a taste of what it's like in other parts of the country.
Well, if you were back in Omaha, they'd say, they'd say, oh, what a nice, pleasant day.
Yeah.
Not as humid today.
That's we're not done with the high temperatures, though. The Salt Lake City airport area early next week is expected to possibly hit 100 again. So it's going to get warm here in Cache Valley as well after the weekend, but a cooler weekend in the 80s and then back into the 90s first part of next week. So don't put those summer clothes away just yet. It's going to be warm for a bit still. Speaking of this, I was curious how this growing season has been. We had a really, really strange winter. It just lasted forever. I think I ran the snowblower mid-April this year was the last time I had the snowblower out. That's a good month after I've usually put it away for the year. So it's and in some years I think sometimes stop running it in February or even January year.
Starts gathering dust.
Yeah, there was one of those drought years. I know I didn't use the snowblower at all. There was never enough to warrant it. So, but it was a long winter, very, very wet winter. You may have noticed 4 or 5 feet of snow in your backyard with trails for the dogs. It was then a pretty mild and what seemed like very short spring. And then we had a very wet June on top of the wet winter that we had. So you may have noticed in your gardens that things are a little bit delayed. Mark Anderson on his garden show on Saturdays talks about this as well, that everything's just a couple of weeks behind when we started. And so we did have a long stretch of warm temperatures, giving most of your garden a chance to step up. But I was curious what this meant for people who do this type of thing, gardening and growing in large volumes. I'm talking the alfalfa folks, the hay folks, the general produce growers along the northern part of the Wasatch Front, and those that are still running some of those tree orchards as well. And so I reached out to USU Extension. I know they have a team that both tracks this but also provides education and resources in various ways to agricultural interests throughout the northern part of the state. Well, throughout the state, really, at this point. And they didn't have anyone available today to join me on air, unfortunately, but they did send along some great information. So I just wanted to run through a little bit of that. We will have, it's anticipated, a shorter growing season this year. The delayed start by a couple of weeks, depending on what you look at for different types of agricultural growth, some produce, for example, actually got cut short a month on what is a regular growing season here in Utah. Certain types of agricultural planting procedures aren't possible until things dry out a bit, and so some things that are normally planted in May weren't planted until the end of June, 1st of July. In some areas. As far as the trees go, we didn't get a late frost, and that's pretty much the only thing the trees care about. So as far as the orchard growers along the Wasatch Front and in northern Utah, Box Elder County, they've had a good year. A USU Extension specialist told me that growth has been stronger than in those drought years. They've been able to harvest already. And the trees are looking a lot more healthy than they did during those couple years of drought, though we are still technically in a drought despite this very wet year. I was told for a full recovery, especially old growth. So we're talking outside of agriculture now, we're talking forests and national forests around us. The trees you see as you head up the canyons around here, they are still in recovery from the drought. The extension specialist told me, working with U.S. Forest Service, they've been doing a lot of monitoring this year to see if there has been a die-off. One of the big concerns is that drought invites other types of disease and pests into a forest. That is something that if you drive up through the Idaho area, especially the Sawtooth National Forest area, those Sawtooth Mountains, the beetle die-off there, beetle-based die-off of the pine forests, it looks like there's been a fire, and there hasn't, but because of the dead trees, there will be. So there's been aggressive monitoring of that here in Utah, in the forests around us, in fact, looking to see if the last couple of years of very extreme drought preceded by a few years before that of milder drought. There's concern that the drying of the forest is going to lead to a lot more die-off, especially of the older trees and the younger trees, and so we'll have less new growth, but also a lot of the older trees dying off faster, and that will invite pests like some of these beetles that can just ravage a forest. Good news on this front, though. They are not seeing this right now. There is still concern. Again, if we have a dry year following this year, dry like last year or the year before, and then one after that, we could start seeing problems along those lines. We're also in an area where this is something I have heard before but never described as well as it was described to me today by extension specialists. We're in an area that is very difficult in most places to fully mitigate the potential for wildfire when it's forest-based. Now, obviously, we can do zilch to mitigate when it comes to grass wildfire risk, but we can tree lines and certain types of cutting and harvesting and clearing in national forests. They can do quite a bit, but the volume is just. I mean, you would need a lot more money and a lot more people than has probably ever been appropriated by the federal government to do this, to fully reduce the fire risk in a forest. So, but again, good news. Despite the drought years, this very wet year has allowed, if not a full recovery of the forest canopies throughout the mountains around us, and also the agricultural interests here in Cache Valley and along the Wasatch Front. Not a full recovery, but definitely a welcome pause in the effects of drought that we've seen over the last couple of years. So fingers crossed that I asked the extension specialist what would be the perfect scenario at this point, because we can also go too far in the other direction and start seeing mudslides and things like that. There was some concern about that this year. There were some mudslides actually this year. So the perfect scenario, if a magic wand could be waved, would be 2 to 3 years, not quite as wet as this year, but close. So not quite as much snow, not quite as much rain throughout June, but something close to that, 2 to 3 years of that, and the effects of the recent drought would be completely overcome at that point. Things would return to a more healthy state when it comes to the forests and our agricultural interests. But that is unlikely. The long-term forecasts and what, for the time being, could be looked at as permanent shifts to airstreams and weather, and the likelihood of heat domes is basically what it comes down to. Bill and I have talked about these before on the show, but a heat dome is what happened last year and the year before. Shortest way to explain it, things are dry and hot enough that it actually causes an atmospheric event that literally works like a force field, like a dome placed over
think of the Truman Show.
The Truman Show, or Stephen King wrote a book actually called Under the Dome that they turned into a really bad TV series you shouldn't watch, but it's a good book. That type of thing, the Simpsons movie. Think that. This is an atmospheric event that is caused by heat, prolonged periods of dry heat. It creates a dome, and then that atmospheric dome actually changes the airstream. So the weather that you want, the moisture that you want that comes with that weather, is actually driven around the area. And that's why Texas got all of our rain last summer, because it went around us.
They don't need all that much
straight
rain.
down. But It was interesting. So one of the things I learned today talking with extension specialists about this, again, the highlights, the forests are enjoying a nice break from the drought, which will allow for some recovery. Not enough. We'll need a couple, 2 to 3 years total of this to fully recover in our national forests around us from the drought years to get forests back to what is considered a very healthy state. So 2 to 3 years of that. We've got one in. Hope, cross your fingers for 2 more. Again, perfect scenario would be almost as wet as we've been the last 9 months, but not entirely as wet as we've been the last 9 months. That was a little too wet. 2 or 3 years of that, we run into other problems on the opposite end of the spectrum. So perfect scenario, it would be almost as wet as it has been, and that would happen for 2 to 3 years. So we'd be back to normal and less concerned about the forest, less concern among the fruit and produce growers along the Wasatch Front and here in Cache Valley. When it comes to hay, to that as part of agriculture, when it comes to those growing alfalfa, for example, we've talked about this before too. Alfalfa, it's a bitterly debated thing right now. It is a water-intensive crop. A lot of people saying, why are we growing this in Utah with our long-term water concerns? We're getting a break from that this year, obviously, but we know this is going to be something that comes back again and again and is going to be, for the most part, a permanent problem as populations grow. Water is going to become more and more of a gold-like resource, and so scarce and highly coveted. So people say, why are we growing alfalfa? The counter-argument is, look, established alfalfa plants are actually maybe one of the best harvestable crops that you could grow in a desert. If those plants are allowed to age enough, they get taproots as deep as 15 feet, meaning they're, at that point, drought-resistant as all get out. So less water can be used. There's also, the state has put hundreds of millions aside in taxpayer dollars for incentivizing and even easing the pain, the cost of those growing alfalfa, for example, transitioning to more efficient watering systems. You've all seen the rolling sprinklers on the big metal wheels rolling through the fields, and a lot of times they have to let those run 24/7, and so you'll see them running at 3 in the afternoon when it's 102 outside. That is not the most efficient way to do this.
A lot of waste.
Yeah. Unfortunately, for a lot of those growing alfalfa, they don't have the hands and the time to go out and run them only at nights or after 6 o'clock. And you see this if you go up through Idaho. You see they're not even trying; they're just running them. So there is a lot of opportunity to switch to more efficient systems and watering processes that could alleviate a lot of the pain. Again, nearly 80% of our water consumption goes to agriculture here in northern Utah. So there is a lot of opportunity still, but when it comes to the alfalfa growth this year, this is what I was told by USU Extension specialists. There is a lot of hay. So, and for those out there who have maybe bought hay, if you've already bought some second crop for your animals, pet or otherwise, you probably noticed prices were down quite a bit. That's why. It was a very wet spring. They got some lucky breaks as far as timing, letting things dry out enough to cut and bale and things like that. And because of that, there is a lot of hay out there. So the shortages that were a concern the last couple of years we've got the opposite problem this year. Most people trying to sell hay this year are desperate to do so and trying to offload it so that they don't have a surplus that goes to waste through the winter. So that's where we're looking at hay. If you want to see some of these maps that they supplied as well, I've linked to them and posted a few of them as photos on our Facebook page. But there's one particular interesting map I wanted to point everyone to. Back to the heat dome and what happens here during those drought years and how it drives the storms around the Intermountain West on down to Texas. Sometimes they swirl back around and clip a bit of Arizona and Southern California. But either way, they don't drop a single raindrop over the Intermountain West for months at a time. What we saw last summer and then the summer before. To put this all in perspective and to remind us all, I think, how interconnected all of this is, one of the USU Extension specialists sent along a map of an upflow stream coming from Hurricane Hillary. And Bill, I'd sent you something like this that the Weather Channel had shared the other night, but this is an even more detailed map I posted on our Facebook page because it's animated. But these clouds that we're seeing right now, and the clouds we saw yesterday and the day before, some of the clouds we saw late Sunday afternoon and evening, those are actually Hurricane Hillary. It's strange to think about that because this is something that hit Southern California and has now made its way into Nevada. But
is it because I know the main energy of Hillary kind of went west of us, went due north, and hit eastern Nevada, and
but it shoots on it basically, if you look at the animation, they call it the outflow. It just shoots on a nice like half moon curve and just throws out all these clouds and storms. But this sitting over us right now was actually
Hillary.
This was at one point part of that hurricane. That then became a tropical storm and hit the San Diego area there earlier this week. So
just dumped heavy rain in those areas.
And it's obviously still got some to give because we're getting it here in Cache Valley. But, it's always interesting to me when you put weather in that large of a perspective. And it's fun to think about that way. If you want to see the animation, if you want to actually click through some of USU Extension's data on this as well, you can see it's just a nice, for the time being, very comforting look at where we are water-wise. Final note on this before we go to the news, reservoirs. I know that's on everyone's mind. I reached out to our friends at the Cache Water Conservancy District and some of the data that has been shared on their website as well. These are public documents. You can download them at any time. This will come as no surprise, but we don't have a single reservoir here in northern Utah that is operating at any kind of concerning capacity right now. And what that means, so I asked for some clarification on that. I said, are you just saying there's enough water in there to make it through the rest of the year? I think that's a given. We all know that's probably the case for most areas this year at least. But what that actually means is that, because if you remember, we spoke with Dr. John Mayer a few months ago, and again the previous year. He is with the USU Climate Center, and he's known as the reservoir specialist. I think he should go with reservoir dog, but he didn't like that. He's kind of the reservoir guy there, and he talked to us just last year about one of the biggest problems of this intense drought we experienced for multiple years, really hitting the hardest the last 2 years. He said the problem is the ground gets so dry because your reservoirs are not waterproof, right? They leak. They seep into the ground. That's a known. But when the ground is so dry, that seepage never slows, never stops. And so you're losing sometimes upwards of 30% of your reservoir capacity is actually soaking into the ground and then immediately soaking out further and further and further and evaporating in the heat and the dryness of it all. With things being as wet as they are, there's been far, far less of that this year. And that recovery has, for the time being, happened. The ground saturation is actually enough to get reservoir water loss through ground seepage back to a normal rate for the time being. So things look pretty good this year. Again, who knows what next year brings? The researchers, climate scientists at USU even are not willing to say we're out of the drought yet. They said all of the weather patterns and long-term forecasts point to possibility just as high as what we saw this year of seeing next year what we saw last year and the year before, extreme drought. So fingers crossed that isn't the case, but there you have it. The overall picture of water and weather in the West from this really, really wet year, so far at least. Again, I've linked to a lot of this that was sent to me via email on our Facebook page, and we'll be back after the news with KVNU's Bill Walter.
Thank you, Jason. KVNU News Time is 4:31, and the news is brought to you by Logan Extermination. A 38-year-old Hiram man is headed to prison for filming several young kids naked and downloading child pornography. Isaac Matthew Rolfe was ordered to serve a term of 5 years to life after a judge called his behavior disgusting. Rolfe was sentenced Monday morning in First District Court in Logan. He previously accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to 2 counts of aggravated sexual exploitation of a minor, a first-degree felony, sexual exploitation of a minor, a second-degree felony, and voyeurism, a third-degree felony. As part of the agreement, attorneys entered a Rule 11, asking the judge to run sentences for all the charges concurrently. According to prosecutors, Logan City police officers received a cyber tip in August 2022 from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It described how an individual, later identified as Rolfe, was using a chat program to share child pornography with other users. Detectives reviewed the files and found 4 videos which depicted adolescent females in various stages of undress, sexual activity, and other pornographic states. The material had been sent by the defendant on or around May 28th of last year. Police were able to identify Rolfe after tracking the user ID and IP address to his Hiram residence. Officers went to the home and seized a laptop and desktop computer. Police conducted a search of the computers. They were also located several files of minor girls in various stages of undress. The victims were later identified as acquaintances of the defendant. A 26-year-old man has died after he was hit by a semi while crossing the road and dragged several hundred feet before the driver fled the scene in Nevada. Police officers said they responded to the on-ramp of I-80 near West Wendover after a report of a possibly dead man on the road Monday just before 4 a.m. According to police, the pedestrian was walking west in the crosswalk near Wendover Boulevard. 43-year-old Shane Joseph Crockett was reportedly driving a semi and trailer on eastbound Wendover Boulevard when he made a left turn and struck the man in the crosswalk. Crockett allegedly dragged the adult male for several hundred feet before stopping up on the I-80 on-ramp where the adult male was left, and Shane drove away, leaving the scene. With assistance from Nevada State Police, officers said Crockett was later found driving the semi on I-80 outside Battle Mountain, Nevada, approximately 178 miles away from the scene of the hit and run. He was taken into custody pending criminal charges. And college sports realignment will bring big challenges to fans who travel to see their teams on the road. Longer plane rides and potentially higher costs are 2 key challenges. Next year, Southern Cal, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington are off to the Big Ten. Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah will join the growing Big 12. And Oklahoma and Texas will debut in the Southeastern Conference. West Virginia fan Terry Keenan says the expanded Big 12 is a bad deal for traveling fans, but Arizona State fan Marie Robbins says she's excited about seeing places she's never been to. KBNU News Time is 4:35.
It's been a crazy few months with big rainstorms fueling the weeds in your lawn, garden, or empty lot, and the spiders coming inside to beat the heat. You need help. Let Logan Extermination take care of those pesky weeds and unwanted pests with an exterior lawn application and interior treatment for bugs. Call Logan Extermination today before your home becomes enemy territory. Logan Extermination, 752-8450.
Weed control starts at $45. Interior spider spray starts at $95.
A late summer heat wave has brought dangerous heat to more than 1 million Americans in 23 states. 2 schools in Wichita, Kansas canceled classes after the AC broke down in one of them.
When it's warm outside and you don't have AC, if you're sitting in a house and your AC doesn't work, you're not comfortable, you can't concentrate. And so the same thing is the same with students and teachers. If they're not comfortable, it's just a hard learning environment.
School spokeswoman Susan Aronson. Harold is now a tropical depression. Not everyone was happy about President Biden's visit to Maui.
Some people were, not welcoming, and some people were political about it. Some people were expressing, I think, their sense that Hawaii is still, in many ways a sovereign place.
Hawaii Governor Josh Green on the protests. Former President Trump's legal advisor John Eastman was booked and released on bail today at the Fulton County, Georgia jail. He, Mr. Trump, and 17 others were named in an indictment that accuses them of trying to overturn the 2020 election. Daria Albinger, ABC News.
KBNU weather for tonight, 30% chance of showers and storms this evening, then partly cloudy after midnight, low in the low 50s, and then sunny, mid-80s on Wednesday, partly cloudy, middle 80s on Thursday. It's been to 71 at 66 right now at KBNU. KBNU weather brought to you by Cache Valley Hearing and Audiology. Turn life up. Schedule a free hearing evaluation with Dr. Paul Danes at Cache Valley Hearing and Audiology. Go to cachehearing.com. And you can always get more news at cachevalleydaily.com. Let's check Wall Street now with Edward Jones.
This is financial advisor Clayton McMurdy of Edward Jones bringing you the closing financial market report for Tuesday, August 22nd. Stocks closed lower today amid mixed results from U.S. department store earnings. Retailer Macy's stated it experienced higher than anticipated credit card delinquencies in the second quarter, raising concerns about the strength of the U.S. consumer. S&P Global's rating downgrades of 5 U.S. regional banks on Monday further dampened sentiment and sent the financial sectors lower by market close today. S&P Global cited higher funding costs and profitability concerns in the higher interest rate environment as key drivers for the downgrade. The run in interest rates is taking a breather today with the 10-year Treasury yield holding steady. While last year's surge in rates were driven by high inflation, the upward momentum over the last 2 months has been powered by surprising strength in the economy, which has bolstered the case for the Fed to maintain tight policy settings for an extended period. This will put a bright spotlight on Fed Chair Powell's annual Jackson Hole speech this Friday as markets look for additional color on the Fed's plans for upcoming rate decisions. We think there is credible support for the Fed to remain on hold for the duration of the year given the downward trajectory of inflation. However, with a fair bit of room still to go in bringing inflation back to a more sustainable level near the Fed's 2% target, we don't think another rate hike can be ruled out, particularly if wage growth remains elevated and housing prices prevent further moderation in overall consumer prices. Today in equities, the Dow was down 175 points at 34,289. The NASDAQ was up 8 points at 13,506. And the S&P 500 closed down 12 points at 4,388. In bond markets, the 10-year Treasury yields are trading at 4.33%. And in commodity markets, the price of crude oil was down 34 cents at $79.78. And the spot price of gold was up $3.10 at $1,926.10. This has been Tuesday's closing financial market report brought to you by Clayton McMurdy of Edward Jones, member SIPC, serving individual investors with personalized attention and financial advice at 1309 North Main Street in Logan. If you'd like any current information, current stock prices, please contact us at 435-753-0537 or visit any of our offices here in Cache Valley or online at edwardjones.com.
Hi, this is Sheriff Chad Jensen. As school starts, we want to remind all drivers there'll be more kids on the sidewalks and on the streets walking to school, more bikes on the streets than normal, and more cars in the school zones as the high school kids get back in session. We would encourage all drivers to slow down in the school zones and all areas surrounding the schools, pay attention to the school zones, and more importantly, be patient as more kids and there'll be different traffic patterns. Please join the Cache County Sheriff's Office in helping kids stay safe.
This is the Sean Hannity Show.
One high school teacher in California threatened to punish students who protested a pride video in a math class. Why are we showing pride videos in math class? I mean, are we using some type of algebraic equation to determine, how many, people are pride in the picture? I mean, is that what it is? How about we teach our kids the basics, the fundamentals?
Weekday afternoons from 1 to 4 on News Talk KVNU.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. yesterday, I'm going to remain very critical of this. The Utah Inland Port Authority Board met to make an important decision that will affect northern Utah and could possibly affect the Great Salt Lake and the wild bird refuge out there near around the Promontory Point area. And they met at 2 in the afternoon on a Monday. I am never going to drop this. Nothing says popular and concerned about public buy-in to a state-level proposal at taxpayer expense like a meeting where they're going to vote at 2 in the afternoon on a Monday. For that alone, honestly, the Utah Inland Port Authority should be ashamed of itself. That is not how things should be done. You know why they have 2 in the afternoon meetings on a Monday? Nobody's coming at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Monday, and they very well know that. What they're going to say is, oh, that's the only way we could accommodate everyone's schedules. Tough cookies. You're on a board spending taxpayer money making decisions that could have long-term effects on taxpayers, on the Great Salt Lake, on northern Utah at large, the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge in Brigham, near Brigham. You're making very important decisions. I'm sorry, you change your schedule in order to have a meeting at very least at 6, preferably at 7. That seems to be the perfect time spot for more people to show up. But 6 will work, and you do it in the evening at 6 o'clock, and you advertise the living daylights out of that meeting. That's your responsibility, I think, as a taxpayer-funded and taxpayer money-spending entity. So to have your meeting at 2 in the afternoon on a Monday, honestly, any state agency, state entity, quasi-government entity, school district, I don't care who it is, city council, county council, if you have your meeting on a weekday in the afternoon, you are intentionally discouraging public input. And that is shameful. So that little lecture aside, what happened yesterday in Brigham City. So the Utah Inland Port Authority has been touring a bit. It's a really complicated history. Speaker of the House Greg Hughes railroaded through a very poorly thought out piece of legislation in his final time as Speaker of the House, launching this whole Utah Inland Port project. It was a mess. It took him years and 3 different lawsuits from cities that were going to be stomped on by the state to fix the bill that the House passed at the Speaker's demand. I'm not even saying, be clear about this, I'm not saying whether a Utah Inland Port itself is a good or a bad idea. I'm kind of agnostic about the whole thing. I think an inland port, I think there's plenty of evidence that an inland port helps a state with trade and commerce and job growth even in a way that can be a huge, well worth the taxpayer expense to develop an inland port when you start seeing the payoff in economic activity. I think several states have proven this already. But there are states that have run into problems because their planning has been subpar. And because they have not accounted for environmental impact, which has then had its own mitigation costs that have made things more expensive than planned, and the profit for the state, the growth for the state never materializes. And so they've shut it down. My point is, if done carefully and thoughtfully, I think an inland port is a good idea for an inbound and a landlocked state. But there is so much to suggest Utah has not been careful and thoughtful about this that one of my eyebrows is up every time I see a news story that mentions Utah Inland Port Authority. And again, yesterday's meeting is an example. 2 in the afternoon on a Monday, shameful. That is the opposite of engaging the public. That is the opposite of giving the public an opportunity to get informed, voice their opinion, inform the board. That was the point of this meeting, by the way. That's what makes this like a double kick in the gut. The whole point of this meeting was for the public to weigh in on a proposed satellite portion of the Utah Inland Port. Let me back up. So the original proposal was a single port location, which would be in roughly southwestern Salt Lake City or Salt Lake County. It would have been, kind of in the marshes and wetlands there between the airport and Salt Lake City. It would have definitely increased freight traffic, rail and, trucking. That was a concern for Salt Lake City. They've already got some air quality problems in the winter. They wanted to know what was being done to make sure that this wouldn't be a problem. And unfortunately, the Port Authority created by the former Speaker of the House, Greg Hughes's legislation said, sorry, we didn't think about that. It was an embarrassing start to the whole thing. Then it was discovered that the legislation would actually basically steal money from Salt Lake City and the taxpayers there by operating business inside the city boundaries without having to kick back any revenue. Former Speaker of the House Greg Hughes said, oops, big oversight on our part, our bad. But then they refused to change it. The legislature refused to change it. The city sued. The city won. That delayed things another year. So here we are 4 or 5 years later. Nothing has been built. Millions of dollars have been spent. The state has been spending millions of dollars in taxpayer money leasing land for a maybe one-day site of the inland port, but nothing has been built because it was such a sloppy start, which is only on the shoulders of the legislature, period. They passed this. They should have asked more questions before they did, but they were in a hurry for whatever reason. I make a few cynical guesses myself because a lot of land is going to be purchased and a lot of the folks in the legislature are in that line of work. It was just an ugly thing from the start. Meetings were disrupted by protesters multiple times over to the point where there were arrests. And these weren't like professional PETA protesters and things like that. These were residents who were angry. Being informed that, now there's going to be a big wall next to your neighborhood and there's going to be 10 times the 18-wheeler traffic in front of your house and things like that. And no one invited you to be a part of the discussion. We just made the decision. It was a really ugly thing. So that brings us up to today in this meeting in Brigham City yesterday. What's basically been decided at this point. So another thing to mention, this has been so messy and sloppy on the state's part. The Utah Inland Port Authority is now on, I think it's 4th chair. That's how many they've churned through because the chairs get burned out. Nothing happens. They get frustrated with the process itself, and they're like, I'm done. So they're on their 4th chair for the Utah Inland Port Authority Board. And what they've now decided to do is instead of building one gigantic inland port, they're going to be 3 smaller main location and 2 other south and north sort of transitional pre-port ports, if that. I can't think of a better way to describe it. One of those would butt right up against the borders of the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge. The map I've posted on our Facebook page, it shows where this basically gigantic warehouse-type facility with a lot of inbound and outbound truck traffic and even some rail shipping because that's the whole point of this is so. We'll back up even further. An inland port, the way it works basically is you have things that are picked up from other parts of Utah for export to other states, even other countries, and things that are coming into the state as well in a reverse fashion. And so in the outgoing fashion, they'd be picked up by trucks, sometimes trains, but usually it's going to be 18-wheeler truck traffic from all over the state. They bring them to this giant, whatever it is, they bring it to this giant warehouse. They drop their trailers, they drop their shipping containers, they drop whatever it is at this port warehouse type facility where it is then loaded onto a train. There would be the location near the Salt Lake City airport would allow for some air transport, but that's pretty rare. And then the majority of it still would just be loaded onto other trucks and trucked out of state. Now, this happens already. These inland ports are just a central concentration of that, and they do offer a state-funded warehouse facility, taxpayer-funded warehouse facility. This is why ports on the coast work, because they offer that storage facility, basically taxpayer-funded. No one's paying for it. but to exist. But then there are certain leasing and contracts that make money for the state to offset the costs of operating that gigantic warehouse. And that's basically what a coastal port is a big open-air warehouse, right? That's what we're talking about building here in Utah. Instead of one, now the plan is to build 3. One big one near the airport there still, one in southern Utah, possibly 2 in southern Utah, but I think they scrapped that plan. And then one here in northern Utah, which would be, again, butting right up against the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge. So we spoke last week with Shauna Hart here on the show, and she said one of her concerns as a photographer who had made some money, photographing out of the wild bird refuge, but also personally, she described herself as a naturalist. She said, I'm somebody who's, thinks we should be good stewards and conscious of our effect on the environment. She said, one of the things that concerns me about this is, one, this history of the Utah Inland Port Authority Board and their lack of due diligence and lack of transparency and being surprised by things that should be obvious again and again and again. And the fact that they haven't really done any assessment of how this might affect water, how it might affect migratory birds. Truck traffic and noise and trains and things like that are already in this area, but you concentrate them and increase the volume of that traffic 100-fold, it could have a negative impact on the migratory bird routes. And as Shauna explained, and as you may well know yourself, that's a pretty big deal. If the migratory birds decide, well, we don't like that location anymore, and they start going somewhere else, we've got pest problems out the wazoo, and a lot of our agriculture starts to suffer here in Utah. So this is not an insignificant thing, and yet here's this Inland Port Authority Board with a shaky track record in dotting I's and crossing T's, having a meeting at 2 in the afternoon on a Monday in Brigham City to pretend they invited the Brigham City community to give input at 2 in the afternoon on a Monday. And, of course, they voted to move ahead with this plan. I'm bringing this up because this is shameful to see our own state government operating this way. And a bit of a lecture for the smaller entities involved in this as well, from Brigham City, Tremonton, the Box Elder County government as well, just signing off on this with resolutions. No questions asked, very little public buy-in. There were posted notices of this being on agendas, but there were no dedicated public meetings, which should have happened. The public meetings that were dedicated just to this issue would have been a responsible thing to do for the Box Elder community. None of that happened. Everyone involved in the vote that took place yesterday at 2 in the afternoon and everything that led up to that vote, including these resolutions passed by the cities and the counties, should be absolutely ashamed of themselves for the process. This might be a wonderful idea. It might have zero negative impact on the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge, the Great Salt Lake, our Bear River water in general. It may be just a great idea that really boosts commerce and increases jobs in Utah, and I hope that's the case. But the process behind all of this, from the cities in Box Elder to the county to the Port Authority Board itself, all of them should be ashamed of themselves for how this played out. Because every step of the way, they have not really gone above and beyond, to say the least, to involve and engage the public in this really important decision that just happened. So, plug in. It's not too late. They have a lot of decisions still to make, but the wheels were set in motion yesterday by this vote. At 2 in the afternoon on a Monday at the Brigham City campus, the Utah Inland Port Authority Board moved ahead with a vote to create an inland port in Brigham City area, just outside of Brigham City, rather, near the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge. And you're probably just hearing about it today. That's not the way this is supposed to work. We'll be back right after this.
A rule of thumb is if your air ducts look dirty, they probably are. Dirty ducts should be cleaned by a certified professional like John Hansen of the Duct Hunter. In a typical 6-room home, up to 40 pounds of dust, contaminants, and air pollutants are created annually, and this builds up in the ductwork. Dirty ducts may be contributing to large health issues that can cause serious problems with people with respiratory health conditions, autoimmune disorders, or allergies. Don't risk it. Give the Duct Hunter a call, 770-4813, to clean out the dirty ducts in your home.
It's the return of the Rocky Mountain Kickoff, a high school football doubleheader played inside the USU Football Stadium on Friday, August 25th. The 6 p.m. game has Ridgeline versus Stansbury. The second game is Mountain Crest versus Pocatello. Tickets are $8 and on sale now at the USU ticket office. Then be there for the Fit Entertainment After Party on the South Concourse, featuring a DJ, food trucks, the 4-time world champion fire knife thrower, and a mechanical bull. Friday, August 25th at the USU Football Stadium.
I am one of over 40 million Americans with migraine. A migraine is not just a headache. A migraine attack can last for hours or even days, often with sensitivity to lights and sound or nausea and vomiting. Thankfully, there is help for migraine. Learn more at headachemigraine.org. Now is the perfect time to find out if what you have may be migraine. Visit headachemigraine.org. Sponsored by the Coalition for Headache and Migraine Patients.
Caller on the line there.
Yeah, she couldn't stay on, but she said, "Why are they building this big inland port when there's that gigantic Amazon warehouse that is abandoned or not being used that they have built? What is that in north of Ogden, Marriott, Sleaterville?"
I mean, it's a really good question. Unfortunately, there isn't an answer because they had this meeting at 2 p.m. on a Monday, and nobody got to ask it. I have actually asked that very question. I submitted. I thought about submitting a grammar request, but others have already gotten on it. I found out from a couple of friends who have been tracking this inland port since its inception 5 years ago, or the project, rather, since its inception. So I won't be submitting any grammar requests to find this, but I've asked that they pass on any they get a response to that might answer that question. To a larger point, there are better locations, or maybe there aren't. I don't know. Maybe this is the perfect location. But again, my objection here is the entire process has been borderline sneaky by the state, by this Inland Port Authority Board, and now on its fourth chair, because no one wants to stick around because the process has been so ugly for 5 years. And then, again, a vote at 2